Which Lula will it be? In Lisbon, Brazil's president charming his hosts in a speech before the Portuguese parliament to mark nearly half a century since the Carnation Revolution that ended Salazar's dictatorship. Lula had raised eyebrows with his recent visit to China. There he accused the U.S. of encouraging the war in Ukraine. And then, with last week's warm welcome for Russia's foreign minister, we'll ask about Brazil's Ukraine stance and about Lula's claim that Brazil is back after 4 years of the far right's Jair Bolsonaro. Portugal, the former colonial power, happy to welcome the return of a leader at the helm during Brazil's boom years of the early 2000s. The world, though, has changed. Beyond inflamed superpower tensions, just look at the weather in Lisbon. The current April heat wave follows record winter drought in the Iberian Peninsula. With the planet overheating, the EU wants guarantees on protecting the Amazon rainforest before finalizing any trade pact with Brazil. Will Lula ultimately side with environmentalists or the ag industry? The world has changed, and so has the 77-year-old Brazilian president, seen here back in February at the White House, alongside his 80-year-old U.S. counterpart on the day that Joe Biden launched his re-election bid. One wonders, can political veterans roll with the punches and those changing times? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the second coming of Lula. Joining us, Brazilian filmmaker Felipe Galvão. Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
We welcome back as well academic Frederico Lira, member of the activist movement Outro Brasil. How are you?
Fine.
From Sao Paulo, attorney Ligia Maura Costa, professor of law at FGV Sao Paulo University. Good to see you.
Good to see you again. Thank you for the invitation.
And from Geneva, journalist Jamil Shad, columnist for Universo Online, UOL. How are you?
Francois, good to see you again. All the best.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation you have on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, on the hashtag F24debate. Brazil's arguments, by the way, inviting themselves to the gates of the Portuguese parliament earlier, pro and anti-Lula protesters squaring off as Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva prepared to address commemorations of that 49th anniversary of Portugal's return to democracy. Some in the crowd carrying the red carnations of the 1974 revolution. His detractors, well, a mix of Brazilian Bolsonaro supporters and Portuguese from the far right.
I see it as a scandal. He shouldn't be here. The Portuguese don't deserve a thief like him. He's an international thief. They don't deserve him in their country.
Those members of parliament who wish to remain in session must behave with the civility, courtesy, and politeness that is required of any representative of the Portuguese people. Enough. Enough with the insults and with your degrading of the institutions. Enough of shaming Portugal's name.
I guess that's a little bit more of an insight into Portuguese the Portuguese parliament there. The far right, a small but very vocal bloc, as we saw, and as we see wherever Lula goes, there are those who support him and those who are against him, also turning out from the diaspora communities. Felipe Galvão.
Yes, I think that the polarization, it overcomes Brazil. I think both of sides are and things. I think that this polarization don't concern only Brazil. You know, people when Brazilians when they come outside Brazil, they see all the same things going on in France, in Portugal, in Europe, in the US, and I think that if you are far right from the far right movement or the left wing, if we can say this, you can see your partners whatever, whenever you are.
Wait, talk us through it here. I'll put it to you, Federico. You meet another Brazilian here in Paris.
Yeah, a lot.
When you suss out whether or not they're for or anti-Lula, does that end the conversation there, and you part your separate ways if you're not, not on the same side? Because there's a lot of room between the far right and the PT. So there must be people who.
And even PTs are like something center, so it's not really left. Let's say I'm very lucky. I didn't meet many Brazilian far rights in Paris. I think there are some, but we live in separate worlds. I meet more in Brazil or elsewhere than in Paris. So I don't know that much for the Brazilian community in Paris. But Lula won actually easy in France. So it was a large margin. So I think that they
Is
are
it
not
harder to speak amongst Brazilians abroad than it was in the past?
It depends. I don't think so here, because the community, the Brazilian community I live with, we meet. All left wing. So I don't.
How about for you, Jamil, in Geneva, home of diplomacy?
Yeah, it is very interesting because obviously we had in 2018 in the election Bolsonaro winning in several cities in Europe, and this time you had Lula basically winning in several of the cities where Bolsonaro initially won in 2018. So there was a change in atmosphere. There was a change in the voting pattern, but as my colleague said, it is a very divisive story, obviously, in Brazil. You can see the result of the elections last year in Brazil, and they were very, very, very tight. So this only translates into the Brazilian community abroad. We're a little bit more than 4 million people abroad, and this obviously reflects elsewhere in the US, in Europe, and in other countries of the world for sure.
It's a big tour of both Portugal and Spain that has been undertaken by Lula. This was the big highlight this Tuesday, that speech on the 49th anniversary of Portugal's Carnation Revolution. People were lending a close ear to what he would say on Ukraine after his recent visit to China. The Biden administration last week accused Brazil of, quote, parroting Russian and Chinese propaganda without looking at all at the facts. Lula, who's said this Tuesday he sees no one talking about peace in Ukraine, but before lawmakers from Portugal, which is a NATO member, the Brazilian president honing his message.
Brazil understands the apprehension caused by the return of war to Europe. We condemn the violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity.
Your thoughts on Ligia Maura Costa? Where does Brazil stand when it comes to Ukraine?
Brazil is a country. Brazil as a country stands, to the side of Ukraine, to the side of no violation of human rights, to the side that we cannot accept dictatorships. And I think this is the side of Brazilians in general. And I would say that Brazilians were quite shocked with some speeches that have been made in China regarding, Russia is not on fault, and it's just, the two countries, they have to work together in order to get peace. It's a little bit simple than that. If Russia just take out its troops from Ukraine, and I think that this is a way, that a negotiator, because Lula wants to be a negotiator, but if you wanted to be a negotiator, you have to show neutrality. And the position that he made in China did not show that he's capable to be a negotiator in this specific situation. Now the new speech, he changes completely what he has said. And now what is the truth? This is, the question that I want to know, and I suppose the Brazilians want to know. What is the truth in his mind? Is he pro-Russia? Is he pro-Ukraine? Or is he going to keep the neutrality, which is the tradition from Brazilian diplomacy? This is the question.
Federico Lira, so again, Lula saying, and you heard that clip, that he defends Ukraine's territorial integrity, that Russia is the aggressor, but he says no one's talking about peace, and Brazil's offering its services.
Actually, I think I kind of disagree. I think Brazil insists since the beginning, Lula government insisting the neutrality position, I think, since the beginning. But as all leaders, like say Macron, when he went to China, he said something about independence of Europe from USA. Then he come back to France, and then he say, well, we are friends with the USA. Then he goes to England and say another thing, and then he goes to USA, and then he says. So I mean, there's no difference between Lula, Macron, or Biden. When he goes somewhere, he said something, or Xi Jinping, Putin. I don't know. He's kind of isolated. So the practice between this leadership, when they come to a country, they make some discourses. But the inner, what is not explicitly said, or the implicit of Lula discourse is neutrality, as always, I think. So I think he and then we have to insist in something. Lula is the only leader in the world, the living people that can make dialogue with everybody, with Biden, with Putin. He's the only one that can talk with both. No one is talking with both. So when he says
Macron tried,
but Putin don't want. But Macron is kind of more. It's true, he tried. But Lula is, because the position of Brazil, I disagree with my colleague, because he insists in the neutrality position and the historical neutrality position from country, for Brazilian country and international politics. He can say, I can try to talk with everybody. But so Macron is not as neutral as that. He tries, true, but he's not as neutral as Lula, I think.
Federico, you're a philosopher, so you know the French existentialists would say that not picking a side is also picking a side. Back in January, Brazil rejected sending tank shells to Germany in case they were used for the war in Ukraine. But on this trip, he took a plane ride with the Portuguese Prime Minister, Antonio Costa, aboard a Brazilian-made C-390 transport plane of a new version. It's a new version of the Super Tucano turboprop aircraft, specifically for NATO. And the idea is that these planes are being built. They're transport planes. They're not fighter jets, but they're being built for NATO. So, Felipe Galvão, is there a contradiction there?
Yeah, I think that the main thing that Lula he had done some clumsy speeches about this.
As clumsy as Macron. I mean, Macron had to do a lot of dialing back after his Taiwan remarks.
I think more clumsy than Macron, but because Macron changes, he's he's very adaptable. His speeches, but I think Lula it had been a very naive approach in this war.
Naive?
Yeah. I think that he has nothing to do with this mess. I think that Lula wants to react to the BRICS thing, and I think that we will not succeed because it's another world. And I think that he wants to sell commodities to China, but I don't think that China is the same China than 20 years ago. And that said, I think that Lula could be quiet and focus on running Brazil in this moment.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? Yeah. But I think on the other side.
So why is he speaking out? Because he can't.
Because he's traveling. He has to do business again.
Yeah,
elsewhere, because the money is there in China. The money is in China. The money is in USA, in Europe.
My question is this economic model still valuable? And yes, and agribusiness model.
Well, let me ask Jamil Chad about this, because we saw it last week. The Brazilian president rolls out the red carpet for the Russian foreign minister. And this at a time when Brazil needs still fertilizer. It needs hydrocarbons coming from Russia. It wants to export beef. Is it just about following the money when you look at Brazil's relationship with the superpowers?
So let's go back to the facts. First of all, Brazil voted in favor of the European resolution at the General Assembly of the UN condemning Russia for the aggression against Ukraine. Brazil was the only BRICS country to vote in favor of that resolution. Point number one. Point number two, I was with Lula in the White House, and the joint statement with Biden basically said that both countries, both leaders, condemned the attacks by Russia. That was the joint statement by Lula and Biden. In Brasilia, Olaf Scholz and Lula signed also a joint statement saying exactly the same. Finally, he spoke to Zelensky. So the dialogue is there. This is one side. On the other side, he is, yes, maintaining all doors open, including the one of receiving Lavrov. These are the facts. You have clear examples of a country taking position on the Western, let's say, position on the war, and you have at the same time a country leaving the door open for some kind of dialogue. If this will succeed, only time will tell. But the truth is that you have examples on both sides of the story of Brazil taking side, the same government, the same week almost, and positions that are trying to give signals to both groups at the same time. Let's see if it will work.
But his remarks, Jamil, his remarks about when he was in Beijing accusing the U.S. of encouraging the war in Ukraine, was that just an outlier, or is that his thinking?
Well, this is obviously a big question, but yes, you have at the same time a country giving signals to the Western world saying, yes, we agree that there is an aggression. And on the other side, you have a country saying, well, if we want to talk about peace, perhaps the first thing to do is to reduce, obviously, the hostility in the speeches. Now, yes, as our colleague just mentioned, it was a clumsy statement, for sure. It was a clumsy statement. My question is, and this is the element that will need to stay, is this enough to position Brazil as a possible mediator, or is this something that actually destroys the possibility of Brazil being a credible mediator? This is yet to be seen. This is yet to be seen if receiving Lavrov and at the same time signing a joint declaration with Biden, is this enough to give you a credential as a, let's say, a deal maker, or someone that will be able to basically join the conversation on both sides? I'm not sure yet how this story will play, and I'm not sure anyone can tell how the story will unfold.
Vijay Maracosta, of course, if you want to play mediator, the two sides have to want to come to the table. But it seems as though the focus right now between Russia and Ukraine is on the battlefield, not on the peace talks. They don't seem to want to sit down at this point. Could Brazil play a role down the line?
I would prefer that Brazil would focus on the economic side and on the business that we have in the country. I think this is much more important than actually losing time and making speech on a war that is not our war. I think that we can do business, but we can never accept violations of human rights. And in this case, I do agree with Felipe that, this is more or less what I understand as well. And this was a speech that we cannot make, and we do not have to support violations of human rights in order to do business. This is, I think, one point that is very important. To be a mediator, you have to be neutral. And in this case, we have two different positions, two different statements from the chief of the state. And I think that this is quite complicated, that he wanted to become a mediator. Second, we have so many problems in Brazil that, you don't have to look after, another problem outside Brazil. We are okay in here. Just focus on the problems that we have in Brazil, like the Amazon forest, like the economy, and that's it.
Right, which again brings us back to this issue of how much Brazil is dependent on, especially this key issue, Felipe, of fertilizers and fuel.
Yeah. So that's my question about the economic model. Then again, it's better. It would be better to Lula to make efforts to review this, to repact the country, to try to repact the country, some reindustrialization. I don't know. We expect something like that. And after 4 years of Bolsonaro, very attached to this agribusiness model and pushing this to the limit, I think that we could come out of this with some reflection. And in order to say something about the mediation in Brazil, there's just one thing that I don't understand. So we're not a military power,
Yeah.
You're not we don't have the persuasive nuclear bombs, so like France. France could be the real mediator in this war because they are in the Western world. They have the atomic bomb, and Brazil. I don't see why enter in this mess is for me. It's very difficult. There's a lot
because
of
it's interdependent with all the parties involved.
Yeah, he gives Sino to one man, another Sino, conditional Sino, and this for commercial purpose. It's not good in this moment of probably a second Cold War time. It's not you're not giving a good image of yourself, I think.
And how much clout Lula has is another question. Felipe telling us earlier how wherever Lula goes, he certainly draws crowds for and against. And it's interesting. Here he is again. Brazil is a former Portuguese colony, and Brazilian soft power, when the president travels, seems to come with a samba beat. Singer-songwriter legend Chico Buarque awarded the Portuguese language's most prestigious literary award, awarded it 4 years late. Jair Bolsonaro had refused to sign off on Brazil's half of the €100,000 Cameos Prize.
Now that you're visiting us, I want to tell you in Portuguese from Portugal, my dear friend, I ask you to forgive me for the wait, all my congratulations, and a big thank you, always and forever.
The bossa nova icon, Chico Buarque. Frederico Lira, how important a moment is that for both Portugal and Brazil?
I mean, I think it's there's symbolic on Chico Buarque, but they made quite a lot of new agreements, like 13 or 14 important agreement between Portugal and Brazil to renew this relation, which is something important. And I think that the symbolic of Chico Buarque is representative because he's a lyricist, but he's also a writer, an important writer. And there are different tones. For example, his last book, where
outspoken against Brazil's dictatorship, he was.
Yeah, important since then, but he's still a very important person and also an author. So his last books is about small novels where he talks about a lot of the new situation in Rio, his city, and the violence on the city, the violence that comes from the dictatorship that never been really stabilized since then and just became worse, and the small violence, the small attitude. So he's very sensitive writer, and I think it's very symbolic to put this sensitive writer in the front that makes some kind of social diagnosis in his writing. It's a kind of very profound and very deep. Since his first book by the end of the dictatorship in the 90s, Estorvo, since until now, all his literary writing, his books are very, very important and always make some. We can read the story of Brazil, the 33
through Chico Buarque.
Yeah.
Jamil Shad, it's true. Felipe Galvão said it. Brazil doesn't have the atomic bomb, but it does have a lot of soft power.
Yes, well, I would like to disagree with the element of having or not having an atomic bomb, and I understand what my colleague said, but I'm speaking, for example, from Switzerland, where the mediation is basically a gift from a country that actually claims or that obviously puts itself as a non-military power. Norway is another country that tries to put itself as a mediator, claiming once again that it is not a military power. You have other examples in the world of countries that precisely because they're not military powers that they can fulfill this role. Now, I do understand as well that this is not our war. Neither was the Iraq War 20 years ago. That's why Brazil did not join in at any point, despite George W. Bush asking then President Lula also to join the war. This time was basically a very similar situation where the Western powers asked at least for weapons from Brazil, and they said no. Now, my worry here is that we are seeing a war that is happening in Ukraine, but it's not only an Ukrainian war. It's a war that redefines the international order.
Yeah, and if I can just interrupt you on that very point, Jamil, in the last minutes, the Russian foreign minister in New York, Sergei Lavrov, was asked whether Russia will withdraw from the grain deal by which it can export by the Black Sea. He says that the Western sanctions are blocking Russian exports of grain and fertilizer. So, Jamil, let me ask you on that point then. If the grain and fertilizer can't come out via the Black Sea, how does Brazil react in that situation?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because obviously Brazil will need at least the fertilizer element in order to keep with its surplus in its trade trade relationship with the world. So yes, Brazil needs that agreement, at least in terms of fertilizer, despite the fact that, Francois, fertilizers are not included in the sanctions. The problem is the financial aspect of the sanctions having obviously an impact on the fertilizer trade itself. So it's a little bit more complicated. It's not the fertilizer itself that is included in the list of sanctioned of products that are being sanctioned, but obviously they get affected. Now, if you don't have channels of communication, you're not going to deal neither with the trade in fertilizer or grain, nor in any other place in the world. So I think, yes, Brazil has been clumsy in the way it is speaking. It is being, I would say, incoherent many of the times. But the fact is, and I'm not saying Brazil is the, let's say, the perfect actor for this role, but the world needs an actor, someone, basically, to allow dialogue to happen. I spoke some time ago to the very high people, let's say, at the UN, and they were desperate because they were not being allowed either to be the ones doing the dialogue. So someone has to do the dialogue. Is it Lula? I'm not sure. I'm not sure at all. But someone will have to do this dialogue. As I said, this war is happening in Ukraine, but it's a war that redefines international order, that violates international law, that threatens the UN Charter. So all of this is a matter of everyone else, not only of, it's not an European war.
Philippe says something important, because Lula is acting, but he could be acting in another way, I think. I kind of agree with him, because what he could have acted in the global situation, in the war situation, because and the new economic and multi-crisis situations should be maybe try, okay, Brazil, we are kind of Pacific country, big country, not as militarized as another, so we can maybe propose some kind of new green economy with degrowth, with new nationalization, with nationalization of the economy, centralizing, and then against the privatization that were made before, and then we can control and then distribute the money.
How Brazil plans its economy is
I
key
don't-
to another is key, in fact, to just as the Ukraine has a spillover effect for the whole planet, how Brazil
Exactly.
manages its economy
So it can
has
be a model, yeah.
has a spillover effect for the whole planet. And that's because it's home to the Amazon rainforest. After Portugal, Lula travels to Spain, where he'll need sun cream, by the way. After a winter of drought, the Iberian Peninsula experiencing alarming heat. The temperature Thursday in Lisbon is expected to reach 31 degrees Celsius. That's 10 degrees above the average for April nearly. Contrary to his predecessor, Brazil's new president agrees that climate change is real. Lula even attended the last UN climate summit. But don't make carbon-cutting goals deal breakers, warns Brazil. France among the nations wanting the EU's 2019 trade deal with Mercosur nations in South America to be contingent on firm goals when it comes to the environment. According to the Financial Times, there's pushback in Brasilia with officials quoted as saying they don't like that the voluntary Paris climate agreement's goals are turned into binding commitments. Ligia Maura Costa, your thoughts on a trade deal between those Mercosur Latin American countries and the EU and this issue of the environment?
I would say that, an agreement with the European Union would be very much important between Mercosur and European Union. And maybe it's a way, to force Brazil, to protect further the Amazon forest. When Lula took power, he did a lot of movement in order, to fight illicit deforestation in the Amazon forest. However, it seems that, the movement has slowed down a little bit. So we have an agreement, with European Union. The European Union would have a little bit more strength in order to force Brazil to protect further and to remember that we have to protect, especially because I see that Spain is suffering, but we in Brazil, we are also suffering. 3 weeks ago, we had a disaster in the state of São Paulo with the raining season, and it was really complicated. So I think that we are all suffering, and we all have, the obligation to protect the Amazon forest as much as we can.
Yeah, by the way, we're not blaming Brazil for global warming. I just want to make that clear, Felipe Galvão.
Yeah.
Should those goals be binding when they sign that trade deal with Mercosur on the environment?
I don't know that they should sign this deal. I know if it would be good for Brazil and for Europe. But because agribusiness will continue is the same model, we will only exchange parts.
So it'll just keep growing and growing and growing.
Growing fertilizers and huge champs of soil, huge champs of orange, and I don't know if it can be good in the next few years. It can be done. Do any good. But one thing I want to say about this, Jamil talked very, very good about the power of Brazil. Brazil have as mediator, and he compared to Switzerland. It's interesting, but I think that Switzerland has another nuclear power. It's financial powers, money, and Brazil doesn't have.
Aren't you underselling Brazil? I mean, we're talking about it as this huge breadbasket for the planet.
That said, indeed, I think that Brazil has a soft power, a huge soft power. It's the promise, it's the possibility. Everybody wants Brazil to propose an alternative way of life, an alternative world. And that's the promise Lula can make for the world.
And Lula, it was interesting in his remarks in Portugal, he was basically expressing open admiration for the European Union and wishing the Latin American countries banded together as strongly as a trading bloc. Let's listen.
If it depends on me, we're going to re-articulate the unity of South America because we want to prove that together we are a great economic bloc. Together we have a much better chance of negotiating equal conditions with the European Union.
Jamil Shad, your reaction to those remarks?
Well, look, the diplomatic strategy of Brazil and the repositioning of Brazil in the world has to do with an attempt to create a multipolar world, a world where Brazil does not need to side automatically neither with the US nor with China. And the strategy is the following. We have to strengthen, first, our own region. That's point number one. And point number two, we have to establish a trade and political alliance with Europe. With that in mind, you understand the attempt of Lula to reposition Brazil in the world, a positioning that will create at the same time a multipolar world and at the same time a situation where you don't depend on one bloc or the other. Now, having said that, it is much more difficult today to establish some kind of a trade or a union in South America, precisely because, first, of the economic development of the region, extremely difficult, the size of the region, extremely difficult, and obviously the vulnerabilities, political, economically, and financially, of this region. So it is a dream, but it is a dream that you cannot think basically as a project for tomorrow, if ever it would happen. Now, just one another aspect that I think is very important when you talk about a trade deal with the EU. Yes, I agree with Professor from FGV in Brazil. We need to take this on board for sure. Now, the question, Brazil, and I'm not taking sides on this, I'm just offering the news, the piece of news. The question Brazil today asks the EU is the following. If you are requesting me to have extra binding commitments in terms of environment in order to close a trade deal, why is it that you didn't ask the same thing for Canada when Canada had the trade deal with the EU? Why didn't you ask other partners? This is the first question. Second question, strangely enough, the requests for extra protection for environment are coming from precisely the countries that for the last 20 years did not want a trade deal with Brazil, naming some of them, Austria, Ireland, France, and others. So is this just a coincidence, or is there something else to the request?
And is that something else? Let's cut to the chase here. Protecting French farmers.
Exactly. Or the beef from Ireland, or other places. Now, I'm not saying that the problem does not exist. The problem exists. The environmental issue has to be tackled urgently by Brazilians in Brazil by taking these commitments. Now, what we need to separate is first the trade agenda, if it is a trading protectionist agenda, or if it is actually a worry and a care for the world. I hope it is a care for the world, but I have been covering this trade deal since 1999, and it's very interesting how the countries that are very concerned with the environment in Brazil are exactly the same as those who did not want the deal some years ago.
Before we go, and this, unfortunately, we're running short on time, we're speaking on the day when Joe Biden has announced that he's going to formally be running for president for a second time. He's already 80 years old, so he's 3 years older than Lula. And the question everyone's asking in the U.S. is he too old? How's Lula doing? He's 77. He's been in jail. He's back in power. How's he doing?
I mean, I don't know. I don't have this answer, but I think the role Joe Biden plays and the U.S. now, that's why I think Lula can take this ambiguous position. Brazil is very important. He used to be the avant-garde of the extreme right since 4 months ago. And the second in the avant-garde was the US, or one after the other. And Joe Biden was important to assure the Lula election because he gave the assurance, he recognized early. He was early against the state coup in the 8th January. So, but about the healthy, I don't know. But I want to come back to the Amazon because this is the key point, I think, of our discussion. Because when hearing my colleagues, when they talk about Latin America and Brazil that have to try to show and develop their own way, I think this is the main point because Amazon, when you are talking nowadays, we have two general kinds of exploration, the illicit and the legal one. And we are insisting too much in the illicit. But paradoxical or not, because it's not paradox, the legal one is the most big problem. Because the legal one is the one that destroys the Amazon, the forest, the way of life in a more organized way.
So can Lula keep his promises?
I don't know if he can
because he did promise on the campaign trail that he would.
I hope he can keep, and I think this is the more urgent. But for doing this, he have to try to reorganize the exploitation on Amazon of the central-west, on the sea, and this it demands a new kind of decision of the country. And as Jean-Michel says, this justify, for example, why you don't send tanks to Ukraine? Because we don't have money to do it, and the small industry that we want to strategic focus on, we should focus on the development or the guaranteed of the for example, of the Amazon to protect from the legal, but not for the illegal, but more for the illegal. It's more dangerous.
Philippe Galvan, very briefly, go on.
Yeah, I think that Lula's election was some kind of last act, the great act, the final act, and his government is the bonus. I think he succeeded to put us out of extreme right, far right movement, and a large, I think, program of destruction of the state. And I think that even if it ends now, Lula done something for the history of Brazil.
Yeah, back in February, again, Joe Biden, we mentioned it at the outset, rolling out the red carpet for Lula at the White House. Lula had just experienced, as was just said by Federico, his own storming of the Capitol, January the 8th, 2023 in Brasilia, forcing comparisons with January 6, 2021 in Washington. Last Sunday, Brazil's government releasing new security cam footage of rioters breaking into the president's offices on January 8th. This after the images had already leaked out to the press. Ligia Mauro Costa, again, we're speaking on the day where Joe Biden announces his formal bid for re-election. Is there a kind of a parallel destiny between these two veteran leaders? I don't say old, veteran leaders.
I would prefer that, the world would have new leaders. Actually, this is something that the world is missing. Leaders and good leaders, and new blood, to run and everything, to run the country. And I just would like to make a more comment about the agribusiness. The agribusiness in Brazil is very much regulated. The agribusiness in Brazil is well done, respect the laws. However, the problem that there is illicit deforestation. And this is compromise, including the agribusiness sector. So this is just a small comment that I'd like to make, that I think that is important to clarify. And that if you take a look on the laws in Brazil, on environmental laws, on agribusiness, they are all fully respected by the big players in this matter.
All right. I see that Federico is shaking his head, so that's priming the pump for another discussion. We'll have to have you both back. Federico Lira, I want to thank you. I want to thank Ligia Mauro Costa for being with us from Sao Paulo. Jamil Shad in Geneva, and Felipe Galvan, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.